My Life with Robyn Lambird, Part 2.
Reclamation, it's a thing. That is actually a thing. Yeah. Do you
Yeah.
have any terms that you use in a reclamation kind of way?
Oh, I mean, I use cripple all the time.
Yeah,
Like,
right.
I
Cool.
just feel like, like I'm not afraid of who I am, and I don't think other people should be either. So, yeah,
So then in terms of that, this is an important thing I think
yeah,
to chat about is when you use the term cripple, obviously
Yeah.
it's you empowering yourself to use
Yeah.
that and reclaiming it. But
Yeah.
do you think then it's okay for non-disabled people to use the term?
I think it all comes down to context. Like, when I joke around with my friends and, they call me a cripple, like, it's fine because, I insult them for, all of the different facets of what they are. But, I definitely wouldn't recommend, your average Joe on the street start calling people cripple, because, it is attached to a lot of, difficult times for people, and things like that. So, but yeah, I do think that, like, for me, it's just about, it's almost like making people awkward to then, like, for them to see the silly side of them being awkward, like, around disability.
Love it. Yeah.
Yeah. So
That's how I feel around reclamation is it's not like a shock tactic, but some way it's just like it's not shock, but it's like causing a slight amount of discomfort, and then it causes them to question their own discomfort and then question their own perception of disability and people with disabilities. So that's a perfect way of explaining it. So thank you. The next thing I thought we could talk about as well is maybe, and this could be a tricky one, so obviously feel free to, say maybe just a positive, but if you're happy to, I would love to hear a recent positive experience you've had in community or with non-disabled people, and a recent negative experience you've had as well.
Yeah, I guess like the most recent thing that comes to mind is recently the West Australian here in WA did a big spread about the things that they were excited for in Perth in 2020 and people that were sort of making a difference. And the journalists that wrote a majority of the articles for that list really wanted to, make it diverse and to make it a real reflection of our society. And I was lucky, like, not just bragging about myself, but I was lucky enough to be included in that list amongst a whole range of awesome people. But I just thought it was wicked that so many of the times, like, we see these lists and it's just like home and away stars and, like, which is great. But, like, I thought it was really awesome that she wanted to, reflect our society, and in that, like, actively sought to find people with disabilities to include in that reflection.
Yeah.
Because I think quite often, even like amongst advertising or, articles that are supposed to be highlighting diversity, disability is just completely forgotten out of that. And, as one of the largest minorities, it's like, hey, like, love your work, but we're here too.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I thought that was really cool. And then I guess as for, like, a negative, just the usual, like, I think just people, like, feeling sorry for me and, like, coming up into the street and asking those invasive questions because they think that, like, it's all like it'd almost be beneficial for me to, like, share my story, like it's as if it's like some kind of release for me or something, where it's like like I don't want to have to every time I go outside just sort of explain myself, like it's just the way that I am,
No, that is a very, very common theme that keeps coming up in these interviews, and just when I'm talking to other people with disability, it's a very common theme that comes up, and it's non-disabled people are asking these intrusive questions, and I think they don't realize that it is intrusive, and it's almost like the curiosity gets the better of them.
Yeah.
And it's such a multifaceted issue because it's like they're curious because they don't see people with disability out in community enough, and that's because of accessibility and exclusion and discrimination and oppression and all the rest.
Yeah.
But it's also because of difference, and they're just not used to difference. So then they just blurt out this question without really thinking what is the impact of the question or what is the desired result of asking the question. And then
I think it's one that I've really struggled with because as someone who wants to bring more awareness to disability, I feel like, ooh, it's my opportunity for, like, an educational moment, but it's like sometimes I'm just trying to, like, go about my day and, like, so yeah.
You don't always have to be educating non-disabled people about, and, like, so for me, I feel the exact same way. Like, I sometimes feel guilty when I and I never really react in a really overly negative way, but I more just am a bit like, not sure why you've asked me that. And then they sort of, think about it and get back in their box and move on, and I move on. But I sometimes feel guilty when I do that, but I think I need to remind myself that, it's not on me all the time to be educating them about that. And the things that I actually want to educate about is not, I use a wheelchair because I have a spinal cord injury. It's, I want to educate people about the barriers that we face and how they can actually make a positive impact to
and
remove.
I think there's just so many more meaningful conversations that we can have, rather than why do you use a wheelchair? It's why do we struggle to get jobs? Why are we left out of education? Why is there a lack of
when they're totally unnecessary because everyone can use ramps?
Yeah, exactly. So yeah.
I don't understand.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I love that, and thank you for sharing that. So, Robyn, there's a difference in our experiences as people with disability. And it's one that I think is important to talk about because in these interviews, I want to represent diversity within the disabled community. And that is that I have a spinal cord injury, which means my impairment is acquired, and you have cerebral palsy, and your impairment or experience of disability was from birth. So I wanted to talk a bit about the differences that you think occur between those experiences, and maybe one of those you could talk about how you see disability as a culture.
Yeah, I mean, obviously I can only sort of speak from my own experience and from what I've observed within the disability community itself and with my friends that have disabilities. But I think for me, having a disability from birth, I think the part it's probably easier for me to integrate it as part of my identity, because it's hard to separate myself from my disability, because everything I've experienced with a disability, and also with it sort of the way that my disability manifests in my movements and stuff like that. It's just the way that I move, the way that I am, sort of thing.
Yeah.
And I think one of the main differences that I've observed sort of between congenital and acquired disabilities is often with acquired disabilities, there's some level of trauma associated with that. And that is obviously going to impact how you sort of observe yourself as a disabled person and the way that you sort of go through the world as a disabled person. Whereas when you have a congenital disability, there's not always that trauma associated. And if there is trauma, it's more to do with how, your interactions with people and your experiences rather than the disability itself. I mean, I guess, and also just living with a disability for 23 years, it's a long time to process everything.
I mean, I'm 5, and so it's a bit different. So
I think that's
that.
And then oh, go on.
Such a great way of explaining that, especially like you said that, I don't even want to say a lot, but a certain amount of people with acquired impairments have that element of trauma. So it's hard to identify as a person with disability when you're still processing that trauma. So I love that. That was a great way of explaining that. Thank you.
No worries.
Perfect. All right. Thank you so much for that, Robyn. I think we got through some really cool topics, and I hope people who followed along learned something new. I'm sure you really did, and you might have to watch it again because I even learned some new stuff. So thank you again for coming, and tune in next week. We'll have someone else amazing joining with some amazing stories. Thanks.
Thanks for following along. Catch part 1 of another intriguing interview next week. Directed and produced by Jason Clymo.